Okay, great. Well, let's just get started then. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we in Master Gardeners provide science-based information to the home gardening community all over the state. Almost every county in California has a Master Gardener program, which is run through the UC Extension program. And there are lots of resources available online for Master Gardeners if you want to follow up on anything. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here are the topics we're going to talk about today. Why would you want to choose succulents for pots and small garden spaces? I'm going to talk a little bit about the natural history. What are succulents and where and how do they grow? And a little bit of practical information on how to grow them with tools and water, temperature, propagation, etc. And as I go through a lot of the examples, I'll just tell you if there's some information about which part of town it might or might not grow in, whether it's an indoor or an outdoor plant, I'll let you know about that too. And I have two inspiration sections. The first one is more about planting things in pots. And I'll go through a lot of different pot designs. And then the second inspiration section is more about botanical gardens that you can visit and also local neighborhood gardens if you're just walking around town. So next slide. Why do we choose them? Next slide. Well, a lot of the plant species are small and they're actually suited to compact spaces in pots. That's just the way they grow. They're really easy to grow and they're well adapted to our climate. A lot of succulents and cacti are from similar Mediterranean type climates from around the world. A lot of them can thrive inside as well as outside. They don't use very much water and they're really beautiful. I consider them to be more like living sculptures. And to me, the leaf forms are just as amazing as the flowers. The flowers are kind of a bonus that you get maybe once a year, but the leaves are wonderful all year long. Next slide. Next slide. So what are succulents? It's a descriptive term for plants that store water in their leaves, stems, or roots, and that allows them to endure longer periods of drought. And they mostly come from semi-arid climates with seasonal drought and rainy seasons, places like South Africa and Chile and locales like that. They have fewer stomata, the little openings that are on the leaves that allow the plants to absorb and release gases. And since they don't have so many, they lose less water than most plants do. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the plant families. Don't worry about the Latin names. They look kind of scary, but it's good to know what they are. So when you look things up online, you can get accurate information. And so there are 7 main plant families or genera: the Agavoideae, Asphodelaceae, Azoaceae, Asclepiodoideae, Cactaceae, Crassulaceae, and Euphorbiaceae. Okay, so we'll look at some of the common plants in these groups and we'll have pictures of them. This isn't even an exhaustive list of all the succulent plant groupings, but these are the kinds that you're going to find when you go into nurseries and you're walking around gardens. And you'll find too, is if the more you look up these things online, you realize that botanists are hard at work and sometimes renaming these things. So it's kind of a fun research project. Next slide. So we'll start with the agaves and the Agavoideae. So that includes agaves, yuccas, manfreda, sansevieria, and fracreas and esperalos. And there are about 200 species of agaves. They're mostly from the Americas. There are about 40 species of yuccas, about 60 of the sansevierias. And a lot of these things grow really large. If you look at the picture here, these are 3 different kinds of agaves that are in my garden, and 2 out of 3 of those are about 8 feet tall now. So I would not recommend those for your small garden space. Next slide. Here's a picture of 2 kinds of agaves over at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden. They have an extensive cactus garden there and a South African plant garden. So that's a good place to wander around if you want to learn more about some of the plants, especially from South Africa. And they do sell some in their nursery. Next slide. Asphodelaceae, these you'll find a lot of these in nurseries. These are Hayworthias, Gasteria, aloes, and most of these are from Africa. Um, the large aloes are best for outside, but there are lots and lots of small ones that you can use in pots. And a lot of people breed these aloes for different kinds of spots and markings on the leaves. So they're very specialized. This blooming Hayworthia that's shown at the left here is one from my house, and I've had that for about 10 years, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It started with one or two rosettes, and now it has hundreds in there. Next slide. Gasterias, these are another good specimen for pots. If you have a little bit of a shade garden, this is a good one to plant because they don't really want to be out in full sun. Their natural habitat is near coastlines and in rocky habitats and on slopes. So when you see something that says rocky habitat or slope, that usually means you better have really good drainage for them. And like many of these types of plants, the flowers are orange-red color. Next slide. The great thing about aloes is they bloom in winter. You'll probably notice if you walked around in the city in the last few weeks that there are orange aloes blooming all over the place. Even the sort of ratty looking ones that are on 19th Avenue are in bloom right now. And there are a lot of them in Golden Gate Park too. Next slide. So agaves and aloes at first glance look like they're kind of similar, but they do have some differences. They both form rosettes. The leaves look similar, but the agaves have fibrous leaves and aloes have leaves filled with gel. You probably know that if you've cut an aloe vera leaf that you'll get that gel oozing out of it that you can use on burns and such. It's a healing kind of a salve. Some of the agaves die after flowering. Aloes don't die after flowering, which is great to know. Agaves are from the Americas, North and South America, and aloes are from Africa and Madagascar. They both have teeth on their leaf margins, but the aloes have softer teeth, so they're not quite so aggressive to have in the garden. Next slide. The Azoaceae are a lot of things like ice plants and living rocks and tiger jaws. And these plants tend to have flowers that open in the late afternoon. This one right here, this is Argyroderma framesii, has big purple flower that looks like a daisy that comes out in the afternoon. Tiger jaws have the bright yellow ones that usually bloom around October. Many of these are from South Africa. Next slide. Okay, this is another kind of ice plant. This one is from South Africa and the Southwest Cape area of South Africa. I took this picture in the inner sunset in a garden, I think it was around Funston or something like that. Next slide. Asclepia doidii. So these are plants like Hoyas and Stapelias, Wernias, Hoodias. Hoodia has actually been used as a dietary supplement for weight loss. And unfortunately, because of that, a lot of the plants have been dug up. And so it's an endangered species in Southern Africa right now. The Stapelia that's shown in the picture here is called a carrion flower. And with a name like that, you can imagine it does not smell good. And since it has this horrible smell, it attracts flies to pollinate it. So this is a really fabulous plant and it has amazing flowers. They bloom in October, but don't put it in the house. It grows outside. Okay, next slide. Here's a picture of a Hoya. This is also called a wax plant. These are really good indoor specimens and in sheltered areas outdoor. And they're native from India to New Guinea, North Australia, and southern China. This is a picture of one that I've had in my window for quite a while. I propagate these every year or so, and it takes about 2 years from propagation to new flowering. And it does really well in a south-facing window. Next slide. So this is the cactus family, mostly stem succulents, are about 2,000 species, and they're mostly in the Americas. And they're much better for extreme conditions, like conditions where there really isn't very much rain or where there's a huge amount of heat. And the great thing about the cactus family is that they can have really spectacular flowers. So something to remember is that all cactus are succulents, but not all succulents are cactus. So cactus is a subset of succulents. Almost all of them are native to the Americas, except for some Ripsalis species. Next slide. So here's another picture, cactus picture. One of the reasons I really like cactus is just because of the form of them. They're really quite gorgeous. So the areoles, or the bumps, or the modified buds that carry the spines or bristles, and the bristles protect the stems and keep animals from eating them. And it slows the flow of air on the plant, and so that reduces evaporation in extreme conditions. Next slide. Here's some more cactus flowers. The one on the left is an orchid cactus. I've got that in the yard. That lives outside all year round, although you can grow those inside. And the one on the right is definitely an outdoor specimen. This one I bought in a 4-inch pot about 15 years ago, and now it's about 15 feet tall. So it does very well outdoors. And it blooms like this about 3 times a year, attracting thousands of honeybees. So I love to have that in the yard. Next slide. So the Crassula family, these are the ones you see in nurseries. There's Crassula, sedum, kalanchoe, aeonium, echeveria, cotyledon, sempervivum, etc. And most of these come from southern Africa. And it's probably the most common types of plants that you'll see in nurseries. Next slide. This is a Crassula picture. One of the interesting characteristics about them is a lot of these grow in a stacked form on a long stem. And they have these opposite leaves that rotate by 90 degrees as they stack upwards. And if they start getting too tall, the stacks just turn over and hang down. And they flower at various times of years. Next slide. Sedum, you might recognize this one. It's also called donkey tails. Many of these are from Mexico. A lot of the sedums are ground covers. One of the characteristics of a lot of these sedums is that the little leaves fall off at the slightest touch. So I have this pot in a spot where I never move it, because the minute I move it, all the little leaves fall off. So you have to be careful with them. Not a great plant to have around with kids and pets. Next slide. Kalanchoe, these are native mostly to Madagascar and Africa. These do really well in cultivation. This one on the left is the flapjack plant that has these big flat leaves. And it will, if you get just the right amount of light on them, it'll get a little bit of red on the ends of the leaves, and the insides of the leaves will remain green. If it gets too much light, they'll start to look too sunburned. And if they don't get any light, they'll end up green. There are about 150 species of kalanchoe. And this is a very, let's see, versatile plant. I've used this in a lot of my plant pottings. Next slide. Aeoniums, you probably have seen a lot of these around in the city. This is just from a city front yard garden. Some of them can grow in the right conditions. They'll grow as large as a dinner plate or larger. And they're native to the Canary Islands and a few other parts of Africa. And one of the reasons they do so well in San Francisco is that San Francisco is almost like an island climate, where there's a fair amount of fog, and there's the influence of the ocean and the bay. They tend to have dense rosettes at the end of long stems. And if if the stem grows too long and it starts to look ratty, you can just cut it off, let it dry out for a few days, stick it in some new dirt, and it'll start growing again. That's one of the wonderful things about succulents, is they're easy to grow. Next slide. Echeverias, they're in the Crassula family. Most of these are from Mexico, and some go all the way down into South America. These are grow in rosettes as well. And they have yellow, orange, or pink flowers. And these tend to grow pretty well in bright light and again with good drainage too. I would say hot afternoon sun is not their favorite. Probably if you're going to put them in the sun, if you have a spot where it's morning sun, they'll do a lot better. Next slide. And cotyledon, you don't see these in nurseries quite so often. There's only about a dozen species. Again, mostly from Southern Africa, as many succulents are. I get these when I find them in nurseries because I think the leaf style is really quite interesting. Next slide. And sempervivum actually means live forever. Hens and chicks, that's what they're also called. You'll find a lot of these in nurseries. There are about 40 species of them. This is interesting in that a lot of these grow in Europe all the way down into the Mediterranean area like Turkey, and they can tolerate really cold winters. When I lived in Germany, a lot of people grew them outside there and they did fine. They just go dormant in the winter and then come back. So if you're living in a somewhat harsh part of town, sempervivums could be your plant. Next slide. Adromiscus, Southern Africa, again, in rocky habitats. They have interesting leaves. This Adromiscus cristatus at the left, has these pillowy leaves. You just want to squeeze them. They're so funny. And they have these ruffled edges on them. I always have one of these growing in my potted specimens. Next slide. And Graptopetalum, mostly from Mexico, about 12 different species. They crossbreed with Echeverias. So if you have both of those kinds of plants growing in your garden and something grows that looks like it might be a hybrid, that could be what happened. And so this is just a picture of the two different types of plants together. Next slide. The euphorbias, about 500 or 600 species, types of euphorbias are actually succulent. There are even more euphorbias than just the succulent kind. Again, Southern Africa, Madagascar, some from the Americas. One of the characteristics about euphorbias is that they contain this irritating milky sap. So if you have kids and pets, don't put this plant in your house. You might not even want to put it in your yard, depending on how curious the kids and pets are about plants. Next slide. Here's one from my yard that's really pretty spectacular. I finally took this one out because it got too big, and it was also impossible to prune because of this irritating sap. I had to put on a mask and goggles and gloves because once I got a little bit of the sap in my mouth, and I had to look up poison control online because it was so irritating, and it can also induce temporary blindness. So take this one seriously. If you have an adult household, it's fine. You can find this information online. There are plant lists about what plants you don't want to have in your house if you have kids and pets. Next slide. Okay, this is our how-to section. Next slide. This is from my little toolbox here for doing succulents. I've got pruners, tweezers, and picks to get little rocks out of things and bits of soil. Since a lot of the plants I do are small, I have a spoon for adding soil in and a brush to get the debris off. And one of the nice things to have is a moisture meter. You can get this at any nursery, and I think it costs about $10 now. And so you can find out whether your soil is very dry or not, and know when to water. And I also use isopropyl alcohol and Q-tips for a lot of pest problems, because that's one, you can just dab them with a little bit of alcohol on the Q-tip and bye-bye insect. So if you that works better inside. If you're outside, you can actually give them a squirt with a hose. Next slide. So watering, that's a really key thing. We say that succulents are easy. They are mostly easy, but you can kill them if you give them too much water. So one of the key things is to, if anything, underwater them rather than overwater them. A lot of these plants are dormant in the winter and their growing season is in summer. So if you have them outside, you really would not have to water them very often. My outside plants, I might water them once a month or something. And if it's raining a lot, I just leave them alone. And if it's really raining, I'll take the pots under the eaves of the house so that they don't get too moist, because they can definitely die from overwatering a lot of these species. So next slide. Here's the moisture meter stuck in one of my pots. If it's anywhere close to moist, you don't need to water. I found that my moisture meter is actually more accurate when I stick it in the ground rather than in a pot, just FYI. So you can go around and test it in different places to see how accurate you really think it is. Next slide. So here's what happens when the plants get too much water. These are my outdoor aloes. This was last year when we had some really heavy rain, and about half of them just died. And I went out in the yard and picked them up, and they were just completely mush. So I cleaned some of them up and replanted them, and they're growing again now. Next slide. Temperature. What you really want to do is look up your plant species to see what the requirements actually are. And if you find out where they come from originally, that'll give you a big hint on whether it can take winter cold if it's outside. And like I said a little while ago, you can shelter pots outdoors from cold and rain if necessary, and move the pots around and then put them back out once it gets warm again. A lot of species like agaves and aloes are fine outside, and they don't really need much extra care at all. They're very tough. Next slide. Okay, so I've found that 3 or 4 hours of direct sun is kind of ideal. A lot of plants won't take full afternoon sun, and especially if you're facing west, because it tends to be a lot hotter at that time of day. And if they're getting too much sun, the leaves might turn red or start looking bleached out and kind of unhealthy. And but if they don't get enough light, they could just be staying dark green and not getting any coloration, or they get this condition called atoliation, where the stems grow really long and looking for light. And cacti actually prefer a lot more sun in general. What I do with my indoor plants is just experiment. I tend to grow them in a bright area, but not necessarily right next to the window. Northern light can sometimes work for succulents and sometimes not. So I move them around. I'll keep them in the same spot for a month or two and see how they look. So it's okay to experiment about that. Next slide. And soil, you can mix your own soil, but the usual cactus and succulent mix is just fine for pots. I have a lot of soil out and back in big bins, so I often add pumice or other gravel to my soil if I don't think it has enough. And I tend to repot the containers about every 2 years or so, unless it's a tiny pot, and that might need yearly repotting. You can use pumice, lava rock, or gravel to add drainage to your soil, or you can plant things on a slope outside. And your pots do need a drainage hole. You kind of take your plant's life into your hands if you put it in a pot without a drainage hole, because it could probably just drown. And another thing that I learned in Master Gardeners is that you don't want to put pot shards or rocks or any other kind of large substance in the bottom of the pot for drainage, because UC research has shown that that actually slows down the flow of water rather than speeding it up. So you don't need to do that. But if you have a really big hole in the bottom of your pot, you could use a piece of screen or the kind of tape that you would use to do drywall around on corners. It looks like screen, but it has a little stickiness on it. So I have a roll of that I keep at home as well. As far as fertilizer goes, I usually use a half strength fertilizer maybe once a month during the growing season. And for most of my plants, growing season is from March, and then I'll stop fertilizing them after October. So they just get to rest a little bit during the winter. Next slide. Pests, pretty much pest free. The bugs I have problem with are mealybug, scale, and aphids. You can test neem oil or insecticidal soap. They always tell you on the labels to check plant sensitivity, so you might just want to spray one little part and see what happens. As I mentioned before, the Q-tip and rubbing alcohol trick works very well, and it's not going to hurt your plant. And if it's an outside plant, I just blast them with a hose. And that's a non-toxic way to deal with insects. Next. Propagating one of the really fun things about succulents is they're really easy to grow, and you can grow them through cuttings of leaves or stems. You can divide the clumps. I usually propagate them when growing season starts. You can tell when growing season starts because all the leaves start coming back out again. And so if you've got a cutting or a division, you can just let it dry out for a few days and then plant it in a soil mix and just wait a few days to water it. And the reason we're told to dry out the cuttings is to let it callus over a little bit, because sometimes bacteria or rot can get in through the open stem. And plants will tend to root in about a few weeks to about a month, depending on species. Sometimes people ask whether you should use rooting hormone or not. I sometimes use it and sometimes I don't. It works without rooting hormone. The hormone just sometimes speeds the process up a little bit. And there's another type of thing that you can propagate with. It's called a bulbil, and it's a young plant that's reproduced on the stems on plants like agaves and yuccas and hesperaloes. Next slide. So here's some cuttings here. The top one is a moonstone leaf. That's just a leaf off of the plant. You can actually just plant that. Senecio, second from top, third from top is a Hayworthia, then a donkey tail and a crassula, and then a Christmas cactus. So all of these kinds of things are pretty easy to grow, I must say. So next slide. And here's one of the bulbils. I actually got that from one of the gardens near one of the stairways in San Francisco. They were all falling off of the edge of this agave. And so I grabbed a few of them and I planted that last year, and now that plant's about a foot tall. So they're actually clones of the mother plant. Next slide. And your neighborhood. As you know, we have a lot of microclimates in the Bay Area. Just in the city alone, it's really different between the Mission and, say, the outer Sunset or the outer Richmond. And the East Side neighborhoods tend to be a lot warmer and more suitable for the sun-loving plants and the cactus. Down on the peninsula near me, it's warmer in the summer and colder in the winter. Some plants like aeoniums don't do that well. I've tried to grow them at my house and they really do not like it down here. One of the key things to do is read about your plants and their natural habitat and see if that matches to the neighborhood that you're living in. Nevertheless, I see all kinds of plants growing all over in San Francisco, and I'm always taking pictures of them. So people grow things all over town, so it's worth a try, no matter which neighborhood you're living in. Next. So inside or outside, I would say that agaves, large aloes, and cacti might be better outside, but things like Christmas cactus do well on the inside. In order to have them bloom, they sometimes need to be pretty dark in the winter. So sometimes it's recommended that you put them in a spot where they don't get a lot of light during the night. You know, if they're near a window that when city lights are coming in, they might not bloom the way you want them to. The sempervivums, the live forever plants, the hens and chicks, those are really cold hardy. And I'm repeating about keeping euphorbias away from kids on the inside. Again, protect things outside from rain and cold. And I've seen succulents in every neighborhood, so chances are you're going to be successful no matter which part of town you lived in. Next. Next. Okay, so I always like the inspiration section because that's what how I work myself. I like to be inspired by going to different gardens and looking at books and other people's plantings. And I just consider that any container can be a tiny world and a miniature work of art all in its own. And once you start growing plants, you just can let your creativity go. And the best thing to do is wander around your neighborhood and see what's growing. And I'm going to show some potted arrangements here in a few local gardens in San Francisco. So next. Okay, we can start with pots here. These are actually bamboo pots that have become popular in the last few years. They're really lightweight. They're inexpensive. And they have all these amazing colors. And you could imagine just doing a whole garden with different specimens in different sizes and colored pots. And these are sold actually over at San Francisco Botanical Garden at the Plant Arbor. They just got a whole load of these in the last month or two. So I tend to use these a fair amount at my house too. Next. Terracotta pots, the old standby, those are also inexpensive and they go well with different succulent colors. And one good thing about them too is that they don't hold a lot of moisture in them. So your plant roots will not be drowning in any, with excess moisture. Next. These are fancier pots. I got these at Cactus Jungle over in Berkeley on 4th Street. And I reserve these beautiful handmade glazed pots for really nice single specimens or little succulent gardens. They're a lot more expensive than the bamboo or the terracotta plant pots. For example, these can run anywhere from $20 to $35 each. So you might want to just reserve those for something that's super special. Next. Top dressings, I put this after I've planted my pot. I use a top dressing on a lot of them, and that could be rocks, gravel, glass. Some nurseries sell these things in bulk by the ounce. Cactus Jungle does that. And places like Lingso Garden Materials down in San Carlos have this USAC program where you can take one of their brown sacks and fill it up with these different kinds of gravel and then take them home and use them for your own plants. That's if you have enough room to store this stuff. Anyway, next slide. This is an example of some of the top dressings that I have, and I use different ones for different pots depending on the colors that I'm using with the plants and the pots. Next slide. So here's an example of creating a container garden. I found this pink pot that I thought was kind of an unusual color that I don't usually use pink. So I thought, okay, well, let's find some plants that are actually going to harmonize with this. So I was over at the Bancroft Garden a few weeks ago and picked up all these little 2-inch pots where all of the plants had some form of red or pink in them as well as green. So I thought that would make an interesting combination. And then I also took some cuttings off some of my own plants at home. Next. So here's what it looks like all potted up. I haven't put a top dressing on it yet because I'm waiting to go find the one that's the right color. The 2 plants that are at the lower right are going to eventually spill out and get really long over the edge of the pot. So it'll be a nice design in a few months. It turns out that reds and greens are complementary colors, and that's one way of designing with plant colors. Next. Here's another small sample. I just had a bunch of random little plants, and some of them had fallen off other plants. So I thought, okay, let's make a small one. So next. I found one of those nice pots from the succulent place over on 4th Street and added those in there. I found an interesting rock, and then I have this rusted star that I also put in there. This whole thing is about the size of my fist. It's really a pretty small pot. It should root pretty well in a few months, and I'll probably have to repot it in about a year because it'll outgrow the pot. Next. This is from a yard in San Francisco on, I think it's on Pacific Avenue. And the tall plant is an Aeonium sunburst. And the agave attenuata on the lower left is one of the soft agaves. And the senecios hanging over the edge of the pot have the elongated leaves. And I thought whoever did this garden did a nice job of matching the pot color with the color of the leaves on the plants. Next. These are done as almost like ornate flower arrangements. So I think they did a lovely job on this. This is really about the only things that they have in front of this house, but it's a lovely garden arrangement. I suspect that they have to replant it every couple of years or so because a lot of these things will outgrow the pot. Next. Here's another mixed arrangement that I did. I added the blue and green rocks that echo some of the colors in the plants. The star of the show here is this Kalanchoe humilis that has almost like tiger stripes on the leaves. And so I was going just for a variety of form and color with all of these different plants in here. And the pot color itself was pretty neutral. Next. Here's another mixed arrangement. This is about red and green, and this has got it's a green pot. It's got the flapjack kalanchoe in it. This is a bigger one than you've seen in the other ones. And there's aloes and the graptopetalums in there as well. That aloe will never get really big. It'll just create little pups around it, but the leaves itself will not get much bigger than that. So they're really good pot specimens. So next, you can think about things like similar shapes in pots. This is one my sister did. She loves these living rocks. And so it was kind of a brilliant choice of this spotted pot with these plants that look like spots too. And then the top dressing that she used under this is this fine gold, almost like sand from one of the nurseries down in Southern California that specializes in succulents. Next slide. Okay, so this one is pretty much all about the pot. The pot is tiny. Again, that's about as big as my fist. And so I planted just a couple of tiny plants into it. And that one would probably have to be repotted in less than a year. This one got auctioned off at one of the botanical garden whoop-de-doos. So that I've done a lot of succulent pots for that. Next slide. This one is kind of a color study with aloes. The aloes have this red margin on the leaves and these sort of reddish and gold spots. And I found a pot that echoes all of those colors. And I also have a lot of rocks that have similar colors. It turns out I'm a kind of a rock hound, as my brother and sister are, and so we're always swapping all of these buckets of rocks with each other, and I use a lot of those in my plantings. Next. This is a design principle you can use for making pots. This idea of symmetry, where you're alternating dark and light, and the forms of the plants are kind of the same. Next. And this one, the theme is I'm doing all Hayworthias there. So the plants are all the same type of plant, but they're all slightly different from each other and all have slightly different markings on the leaves. And again, I decided to use a very neutral pot so that you wouldn't focus on the pot, but just on the leaves of the plants. Next. And so here's one that's a single species. It's a peanut cactus. And it also has these mineral specimens in it. If you look on the lower right there, there's a geode there, and then there's another rock in there that's a combination of quartz and a black mineral. And I have a red and yellow thing on the back that's not shown. So it's a combination of all of these design elements. Next. I like single specimens if the plants are really special. And this, I love this plant. It's actually a terrestrial bromeliad, but sometimes it's considered to be a succulent. It'll grow really slowly into this spectacular mound and then hang over the edge of the pot. And it's called Deuteroconia brevifolia. And you can see some really big ones at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden. They're rare enough that they're quite expensive. The one that I bought was in maybe a 3-inch pot and it cost $15 or $20. And so a specimen of this size, this has been growing for probably 8 years or so, would probably cost $200 or $300 if you would get it in a nursery since they're so slow growing. Next. Okay, I like that plant so much. I got another interesting pot that kind of echoes the form of the leaves. And eventually this is going to grow over the rim of the pot too. I propagated that from the larger plant. So this one's been growing for about, I don't know, 3 years now, something like that. Next. And I'm showing those two plants together with single specimens that all kind of have a similar look to them. So I have those together on a rock wall outside. So it makes its own little kind of a garden. Next. I like things, oddball planters, like these wooden driftwood planters. Since a lot of succulents don't need that much soil to grow, you can put a little bit of soil in these holes, stick the plant in, and let it grow. I spray it lightly once a week in the summer. In the winter, I don't do much to it. I've had to trim these plants back a little bit because they outgrew the holes already. So it requires a little bit of maintenance. Next. And here's another one. This is a great big one. This is from the Succulent Gardens Nursery, which is down near Moss Landing. I don't know if any of you have been there or not, but they have an amazing selection of succulents and also demonstration gardens that show you different ways to plant things. Next. And this is another one from my sister, who's always got a sense of humor with plants. This is a giant clamshell we had in the yard forever. And so she decided to plant cactus in it. So she just tilted it up on the side so that the water drains out naturally. Otherwise, the cactus would just drown. Next. And a lot of nurseries will sell these wooden forms. You can use them as a tabletop display, or you can hang them vertically. They're a little more challenging to water and the plants outgrow them, but they can be a fun way to make arrangements. You'd have to, if it's hanging up, if it's outside, you can spray it, but if it's inside, you might have to put it in the bathtub or something and give it some water and then hang it back up again when it's dried out. Next. Okay, we're on to the second inspiration section. Again, observe how plants grow in their native or local habitats. There are actually a lot of native succulents in California. If you go down to the coast, say San Mateo coast, or a lot of the bluffs that you see up in Marin, you'll see dudleas growing on the cliff sides. And there are a lot of plants even up in the Sierras that are succulent. And see what looks good in your neighborhood. Public gardens are a wonderful place to go to. I always get inspired by going to nurseries too. I'm a plantaholic, so I'm at nurseries pretty often. And I always take pictures of interesting gardens and arrangements. There are lots of great books and websites for resources, and we'll talk about a few of those towards the end of the talk. So I'm going to show you some more interesting pictures. Next slide. So down near me, this is the Stanford Cactus Garden. This was started, I think it was 1860s or 1880s by the Stanford family. And this is way over scale for most people. But it's a great place to go and see how all of these things look together. I just use it for inspiration and then take some of the design themes from places like this and make them work in a smaller space. Next. So I was just over at the Bancroft Garden a couple of weeks ago. The one on the right is in full bloom right now. I think that's a kalanchoe too. That's a good place for inspiration, and they also have a very nice nursery there. Next. If you're down in Southern California, this is the pilgrimage site for cactus and succulents. It's amazing. It's way over scale for any of us up here, but it's very inspirational, especially when a lot of these plants are in flower, which is starting around now and going for the next couple of months. Next slide. This is one of my favorite little gardens. Again, this is not really local, but I include these slides because they're so amazing. This is a tiny garden. It's a couple of acres in Corona del Mar in Southern California, and they have a very small succulent section. But the person who designed this, who I think actually was a student at one of the community colleges nearby, did the most fabulous job of combining rocks and pots and different kinds of plants. It's really pretty darn stunning. Next slide. I mean, you can do just about anything with succulents. What he did here was almost make a painting out of them and combining color and scale and form and rocks. It's pretty magical. Next slide. This is a dry stream bed with all different kinds of colors and forms. I really like the addition of tiny little bits of red in there and a few pops of color with the striped leaves. You can see in the middle there, there's that mounding plant that I was just talking about in my garden that's going to grow quite large someday. Next slide. He did a thing with barrel cactus and agaves too, and a lot of rocks. These agaves that are here, they're kind of at the lower left area, are very slow growing and don't get very big. They work quite well out for an outside garden. Next slide. Again, interesting plant combination. Spiral aloes there are really amazing. Those are from South Africa. I tried to grow one of those at my house and it eventually died because it didn't get good enough drainage. And there's a spotted bromeliad in the background that adds a little bit of red color. Next slide. And here's an example of a pot, a terracotta pot with these different shades of gray-green in them with the donkey tails and the wavy agave. And there's some echeverias in there as well. And then there are red bromeliads surrounding it to add a bit of contrasting color. If it was all green there, it might not be as interesting, but the fact that there's this red in there makes it much more of an interesting composition. Next slide. And this is the last in this set. You've probably seen a lot of these over the years, but it was just a dry fountain that was used to showcase a lot of different plants. And of course, you don't use it as a fountain anymore. You just have to water it with a watering can or a hose from time to time. Next slide. Again, if you want to see a spectacular cactus garden, Lotus Land is a good place to go. I took a lot of pictures down there just because it's very whimsical and creative in a kind of a wacky sort of a way. So it is pretty inspirational. Next slide. Getting a little closer to home, there are lots of really nice succulent gardens in Carmel if you walk around the town area there. And these big ones are aeoniums, the ones that grow so well in San Francisco. And I always like this idea of having plants growing out of rock walls. And you see that a lot in the neighborhoods in the city too. Next. This is the San Francisco Botanical Garden with that theme of plants growing out from the rock walls. Next slide. Salesforce Park. I don't know how many of you have been there, but there's a really nice cactus and succulent area in there. There's 13 unique ecosystems that are there, and you can make a circle all the way around it and check them all out. It's really a lovely place to visit. Our local, Adam Greenspan is a local landscape architect, and he's the person who designed this. Next slide. This is down at a shop in a place called Summerland, and it only has 3 different kinds of aeoniums, and it makes this amazing pattern. So you really don't have to have a huge plant palette. You could easily do this in San Francisco because these plants would grow like crazy there. Next slide. And this is in San Francisco. This is on Lion Street, and it's all succulents except that there's a juniper shrub in the background there. And I thought that whoever planted it did a really nice job with it, and especially adding those rocks those stones as a border around it that butt up to the sidewalk. It makes a really nice design element. Next slide. Another front yard garden in the city, the mix of big pots and succulents in a raised bed. So all of these things grow really well, and it's pretty dramatic. That's a small space, and you can do a lot with that if you can mix the plants and the pots together. Next, this is a really teeny weeny one. It's about 8 inches wide and 2 feet deep, and it just has 2 succulents and a tall grass in the back with a spotlight on it. So if it's nighttime, the spotlight's on and it just shows off these plants. But it's quite elegant for a really tiny garden. Next. And these are the pots at my house. I have a garden shed with a bunch of shelves on the side of it. So this is where a lot of the small specimens live. And the larger ones are just on the ground. Because once I get them in pots that big, I can't move them anymore. Next slide. And this one always makes me giggle. It's over in Golden Gate Heights, and it's just one of these uncultivated areas near the cliffs there that doesn't really belong to anybody. I think it's just city property. So somebody in the neighborhood has just come along and planted all these little tiny succulents there, and who knows what that's going to grow into. So there are spots like that all over the city. A lot of them over in Golden Gate Heights, actually. And if you've been over there near where the staircases are, where the mosaics are on the stairs, you'll see a lot of plantings like this. And they tend to be tended by local volunteers, which is really pretty wonderful. Next. And another San Francisco street planting. This is just one of these things about 5 by 5 near somebody's driveway on the curb. And there was a plant in the middle of it, and it's just succulents and a little bit of rosemary. And I thought it was just done in a really sensitive way. Very simple, low maintenance kind of a thing to do. Next. And this is on 9th near Kirkham. And it's all aeoniums. And when they bloom, they're just crazy. They kind of die back after they bloom like this, but this is one of the most spectacular little front yard gardens I've seen in a long time. Next. And another inner sunset garden, and it's just aeoniums and this Oscularia deltoides. Just 2 kinds of plants, but they're both blooming at the same time. And this is in a front yard garden. It's probably 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, right on the edge of the driveway. And it's just so charming when you find something like this. Next. Okay, so that's pretty much it for my picture show. So I'm kind of winding things up here. So in summary, succulents typically grow where there's distinct wet and dry seasons, and that's the kind of climate that we live in, and they tend to be pretty water wise. So that's lucky considering that water is a valuable resource. You can grow them inside or outside. I always urge people to learn about plants so that the more you learn about them, the better grower you're going to be. it's really fun research to do too, between looking up things online or buying books, going to the library and finding books, and just try and find inspiration, whether it's in your neighborhood or going to a botanical garden or to a nursery. There are things to look at all over the place, and I just urge you to experiment with it and to have a lot of fun. So next. I've got a list of, all of this information can be available to you after the talk, so don't worry about trying to write any of this down. You'll be able to look at it later. So we have gardens all over the place here: the San Francisco Botanical Garden, UC Berkeley, the Bancroft Garden, and in Southern California, the 3 other gardens listed here, if you're down in that direction. Next. We have lots of great nurseries: Flora Grub, Cactus Jungle and Dry Garden in Berkeley, San Francisco's Plant Arbor, Succulent Gardens in Castroville near Moss Landing, Highway 92, Succulents, Half Moon Bay, and there's this whole series of nurseries right along there. Lone Pine Gardens in Sebastopol if you go to the North Bay. Sloat has lots of neat stuff too. There's this cactus center in Pasadena that sells all kinds of rare specimens to collectors. So if you're ever down there, it's worth a visit. And all of our local nurseries carry a lot of succulents, fortunately. So if you have a favorite nursery of your own, I would urge you to frequent it and buy plants from them. Next. So books. Deborah Lee Baldwin really has a spectacular series of books relating to planting succulents. She has a lot of information about plants, but a lot of it are pictures about how to plant things in a beautiful way. So she has examples from gardens all over the place. For more plant information, this American Horticultural Society's book is good for reference. Next. I use this Timber Press guide for a lot of more botanical information. It's very complete. And I have another book called Cacti and Succulents that lists a lot of the typical species. Next. And there's some other publications, a few online things. You can find a lot on the University of California Agricultural Natural Resources sites, the Master Gardeners sites, and the Master Gardeners. Just go, when you go to one of these sites, just search for succulents and a whole number of pages will come up. Next page. And websites again, Deborah Lee Baldwin. I love her website. She loves aloes, and so she lists almost every kind of aloe you could ever find there. And so it's a great reference. And the Sonoma County Master Gardeners have a really good web page too. So I would urge you to go take a look at that as well. Next page. I'd just like to thank San Francisco Public Library for making this possible. And this to Master Gardeners of San Mateo and San Francisco County. Please use our resources if you want. We have lots of things online and we give a lot of talks too. So stay tuned with things like that. And thanks to Aridi and Ramon again. Next page. And we have these QR things. Again, you can get this later, so don't worry about it now. You don't have to get your phone out. Anyway, next page. And we do have places where you can use our helpline over at Elkus Ranch in Half Moon Bay, or you can go to the San Francisco Botanical Garden Library on Fridays. Or if you live down closer to Redwood City, you can go to the Veterans Memorial Senior Center, and you can talk to people on the phone. You can send email about this. You can go down in person and talk to people. And so we're glad to help you out with any kind of plant issue that you might have. Okay, so I think that might be the last slide there.
Yeah, you're correct, Del. All right. Well, thank you for such a comprehensive and varied and love your pictures presentation. And apparently the audience did too, because we have several questions for you.
Oh, okay, great.
So I'll take one of the first ones, which is what will happen if you wait too long before repotting a succulent?
Oh, if it looks like it's gonna fall over because the stem is too long or it just looks ratty?
Yeah, I guess that would be examples of waiting too
Yeah,
long.
okay.
Right,
So
yes.
yeah, I'll give you an example of what I do. Sometimes some of my plants look ratty, like the stem will get too long and it'll have a lot of dried leaves on it, and it just doesn't look that healthy. So what I'll do is cut the stem
Mhm.
and take the dried leaves off and just let it sit there and dry out for a while, and then just plant it again. And if something has rotted leaves on it, I'll take it out of the pot and pull all the rotted leaves off, let it dry out a little bit, and then replant it. Um, Chances are you can salvage something and just start a new one. It's
Right.
pretty easy to do.
Because they're such hardy plants, as
They
you
are, yeah, yeah, yeah.
illustrated. Right. Okay, here's another one. We have a small apartment and the only windows face north.
Hmm.
We don't get any direct sunlight to speak of, but do get a fair amount of indirect reflected light.
Hmm.
Our succulents really don't do well. Is it
Hmm.
because of the poor light?
It could be, it could be. Um, Earlier on in the talk, I remember mentioning gasterias, which are plants that like to grow in more shady areas. So if you find a plant that you like at the nursery, look it up on your phone while you're there and see if you can find some information about it. And if it's a plant that's prefers to grow in a shady area, chances are it's going to do pretty well in that location. I have stuff growing in my north-facing windows at home. Not everything does well there, but some plants really like it. So I think it's going to be kind of plant specific.
Uh-huh. And could it also be a watering issue?
Yeah, if it's not getting enough light and your water, and you might be watering it too much, that could kill it.
Right. Okay, so maybe this is where the moisture meter
Hmm.
or using your index finger until you get your moisture meter
Right,
in a
right.
plant and seeing how dry the soil is.
Yeah, yeah. If you stick your finger in and it's still damp, don't put any water in it.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb, right?
Hmm.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Here's another one. I have a center patio. It's 9 foot by 7 inches by 5 feet 5 inches,
Hmm.
running east to west on 17th Avenue.
Hmm.
Not too much fog. Any
Hmm.
advice for planting succulents there?
Well, in that neighborhood, all kinds of things grow.
So east to west, it
Well, you know what? That means it's going to get, if it could get morning and afternoon sun.
afternoon sun.
So, plus straight overhead sun,
Mhm.
imagine.
Right.
So certain things, yeah, again, that's just you might if you might want if you is this something that's growing in the ground or in pots? Because if it's in pots, what you can do is just move them around and see which ones do best. Um,
In fact, that might be a good way to start. It almost
yeah.
sounds like any
Hmm.
advice for planting succulents, like they're perhaps starting out or
Hmm.
wanting to develop this area. So
Hmm.
that might be a good way for them to test in the beginning is by putting the succulents in pots.
Yeah, yeah.
Seeing,
Yeah, succulents will show you pretty quickly if they're getting too much sun because they'll get this really weird sunburned aspect to them where they just don't look that healthy. Um, so after about a month, you can probably tell whether the plants are doing okay if you have them in pots.
yeah. And if they are in the ground, can you transplant a succulent like once you
Yeah,
put it
yeah,
in the
yeah,
ground?
sure.
You can move it, right? So it could be
Yeah, you
moved.
can move them. Yeah, you can move them around. Yeah, I've a lot of stuff in the ground at my house I've had to move because like some of the ice plants, for example, I've tried to put them in an area where they weren't getting enough sun, so they didn't bloom at all.
Mhm.
After a year, you could tell that was the wrong place. So I just dug them up and moved them to a spot where it got a lot more sun.
Right.
And
And
sure enough, that worked.
a little follow-up to this question. So when the succulent looks sunburned, is that typically the leaves of the plant turning red? Reddish?
Yeah, well, things like the flapjack, a little bit of red actually looks beautiful on it.
Right.
Um, but if it gets too much, it'll turn all red and get kind of crispy looking, or like orchid cactuses, for example. If those are looking healthy, the stems and leaves on them still look pretty green and they flower. But once they start looking yellow and kind of reddish, I've seen them in yards where they get all day exposure. They just they don't look happy at all.
The 4 hours, as I recall, is about the minimum.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
interesting because, cactus can do a lot better in these harsher full sun environments, but a lot of succulents come from climates where they have a little bit of shelter from full sun. Or
right.
like the living rocks, for example, they grow in crevices because they need a certain amount of shade from the rocks that are growing nearby.
Yeah,
If
good
if they
point.
were in full sun, they would just die.
Okay. And here are two questions sort of combined into one, and it's talking about the rocks or the top dressing
Hmm.
on top of the succulent plant. Is this aesthetic only, or do these rocks or top dressing um, assist with drainage? And then
They don't help with drainage, but they do help keep a little bit of moisture in.
they keep the moisture in. Okay. And the second part of the question is, does putting the small rocks on top, does it compress the soil? And then how do these rocks affect plant growth and affect water to the plant? And I think you
Mhm.
just answered that
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Well, the water flows around the gravel. The kind of top dressing I usually use is gravel, and I don't put that much on it. It's just enough to cover up the soil,
Uh-huh.
and the water flows just fine over the gravel and through the dirt and
Right.
everything. So it's really not a problem, but I wouldn't put like inches of gravel necessarily because it
Just
might
a
start to
light dressing then, like a
yeah,
light
it might
dressing.
compress the soil a little bit.
Yeah.
It's primarily an aesthetic thing to do to kind of balance out the composition that you have going in your pot. And so I'll try and pick top dressings that actually either harmonize or complement the color or something like that so that it makes it look a lot neater and prettier. But I haven't found that it's really harmed anything.
Okay. That's good to know. And you certainly have grown a lot of succulents. So, okay, here's another one. How do you position one leaf in the soil when you are propagating it? Can you put several single leaves in one pot?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do a lot of. For example, if you just have these single leaves, you can get a pot. Say you get a pot this big and maybe you have 10 leaves and you
Mhm.
just stick them straight down.
Yeah. And so there's the
So the
position
roots will grow
asking
from the
about,
bottom. Yeah.
right, it's straight down.
Yeah, just put it straight down.
And
Yeah.
then how much of the bottom of the leaf are you putting under the soil?
Just enough so that it stands up straight.
So it stands up straight and it's supported and it won't
Yeah.
fall
Although
over.
some of these little leaves in their natural habitat, what they do is fall off the plant and they'll just start rooting themselves anyway. But it just gives them a little bit of an extra boost if you stick them in down like this. And so the roots will grow out of the bottom.
Sure. And this is kind of related again to this topic. Um, and I think you've addressed this. You don't lay the leaf on the surface to propagate it. You put it straight down into the soil.
Mhm.
So that's part of your question is addressed. Should you wait until the cuttings have roots before you plant them?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I have a bucket where I just throw a lot of cuttings. And
Especially if you can't plant them right away, right?
yeah, some of them I can't. So I'll just go through that and notice that some of them have roots on them already. They just want to grow. So that's what they do. And others have nothing on them. And so they won't be growing roots for a while. I don't know, a couple weeks, a month.
Yeah.
Usually what I do to tell if something is rooting or not is I'll grab it a little bit on the top and then just pull gently.
Mhm.
And if there's resistance, it means the roots are growing. But if there's no resistance, it's not happening yet.
Okay, that's a good test. Here's a question about succulents touching each other. If you plant succulents touching each other, will they spread?
Yeah. Well, what tends to happen is sometimes I do this dense planting of succulents, and it turns out that some are more aggressive than others. And those aggressive guys will overgrow the other ones that are not quite as aggressive. So you just have to monitor it. And then sometimes some of them will grow a lot taller than the other ones and they'll shade out the other ones. And then the other ones don't grow quite as well, or the leaves might rot underneath. So it's just one of these things where you just have to go out and be aware of what's happening.
And when
It's being an observer, and just checking and see. So you
yeah,
develop a sensibility after a while.
yeah, and you start looking at your patio or your garden as a little bit of a lab experiment, like
Mhm.
what does well in certain areas. But also when you buy plants, even succulents, they'll usually say on the plant label, or like Dell said, you could look it up, how wide and high that plant will grow,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So you could always use that as a guide when you're planting several in mass. How
Mhm.
close or far apart shall I space these?
Yeah, it kind of depends on, there are a lot of different planting styles. Some people like to plant things so far apart that there's enough room for them to grow into their maximum size, right? That's kind of the sparse planting method.
Mhm.
That means you just have to wait longer until the garden looks the way you want to. And then other people like to do this dense planting thing where they'll plant them a lot closer together. And then you have to go in and actually edit them out when they start to overgrow the area. So it's an art, not a science about
Right.
some of that. It's kind of what's your style?
Right. And then if you edit those plants out, you could take them and plant them in a new area,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
true.
Right. So you'd be
That's
able
what my sister does. She's one of the dense planting people. She
uh-huh.
plants stuff everywhere and then she has to pull a lot of them out and then she moves them over to another part of her garden and starts over again.
Okay. So that those are the questions I'm going to look in the chat. These are the questions in the Q&A, all that I have in the Q&A. So let me quickly look at the chat and see what we have there, if anything.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's no questions
no
that are
questions.
coming through the
Okay.
chat. Yeah.
So at this point, I wanted to thank Dell for a superb presentation today. Thank the participants that came. And Ramon, I'd like to turn it over to you for any closing thoughts, comments, or announcements.